Is everyone ready?
Silence.
Okay. So basically today I'm going to talk about judging. I know judging isn't always as exciting as it's speaking and you don't get the same adrenaline rush, but it is very, very important that you do it well, and it literally bleeds into everything you do as a debater. And it really gets to me that we're not really taught expressively how to judge, which means people will go on judging for quite a long time, having missed out like very basic things because they've never been told explicitly how to do it. But yeah, generally judging is great. Why do we love judging? First of all, because it makes you concentrate through the entirety of the debate. I honestly struggled when I first started debating, keeping switched on for an hour. It can be quite challenging. But one of the things with judging is it exercises that brain muscle that makes you concentrate for longer and longer. It means that you're taking in information very quickly. The more you do it, the more stuff you notice that speakers are saying. You can pick up on people's nuances quicker. You have you gain the ability to look at things from a non-biased viewpoint because you're supposed to be an average, reasonable voter with no particular political sway. It helps you identify points of clash in debate. So whilst you're speaking, it's very, very useful to know what are the most important issues in that debate and what things you need to spend the most time proving. Judging is one of those things that helps you do that because as a judge, it's your job to find those points of clash and whoever has proved them best. It improves your summary speeches, no end, because a summary speech is effectively a biased judge. Right at the end of your team, summary speech is a full speaker, by the way. Right at the end of your team, your job is to sum up the debate, and you're almost doing the judge's role, where you're here are my points of clash, as if you were judging it. Yeah, and it also means you become familiar with what you need to do to get a high speaker score. Learning how the speaker score works and what sort of things are an 82 versus what sort of things are a 76 is very, very useful. It's something that you pick up through judging. Hiya. Okay, so judging is great and you all should care lots about it. Okay, so as a judge, you take the position of an average reasonable voter. This average reasonable voter doesn't exist in real life. They're just a hypothetical person that you face yourself with, because no one's actually like this. So you have no pre-formed political views, you don't sway more to the left or to the right. Be really wary of this. I have to be very wary of myself if I'm ever in quota debates, because I love quotas, and I have to remind myself that I love quotas and not credit quota arguments too much because I'm oh, they're so great, I love them. So beware of this and beware of your own political biases whilst you're judging. You're not convinced by bad reasoning. So if someone is doing a slippery slope argument or doing something that's obviously wrong logically, you don't credit that. You're moderately informed about political and social affairs. The extent to which is kind of debatable. The way I see it is it's someone who goes on the BBC website every now and again and reads the top news. So they know the most basic things. So they know there's a refugee crisis right now. They know that Donald Trump is not the Prime Minister and stuff like that. But they don't know they don't know our current GDP or what inflation is at the moment and stuff like that. But they do have the ability to understand very sophisticated arguments and reasoning. So even though they do not know any of this stuff about any intricate political knowledge, they're still able to understand complex arguments. Okay, this is ripped off a World University Debating guide from about 3 years ago. This is specifically for teams, for how teams win debates, but it also applies for judges. So teams win debates by being persuasive with respect to their burdens their side of the debate is attempting to prove, within the constraints set by the rules of British parliamentary debating. I will not bother with this bit with the constraints set by the rules of British parliamentary debating because we all know how extensions and summary speeches work. But I will. Does anyone want me to go over that? Okay, cool, that's fine. But I will talk about the top. So what does it mean to be persuasive about the burdens that teams have to prove? So teams will place in a debate depending on how well they are persuasive about the specific burdens that they have to prove upon their side. Okay, so what do we mean by burdens? Burdens are premises in your arguments that need to be proven to be true so that your conclusion can be true. So for example, if we had the motion, this House would impose quotas for women in Parliament, all these premises would be burdens that you'd have to prove. So you couldn't just state quotas are the best way to stop there being a lack of female politician role models for people and all these bad things. You need to take, teams need to take that and they need to break it down and they need to be persuasive about it using things like analysis and lots of other methods that I'll talk about a bit later. Some burdens are a lot more intuitive than other burdens, so like there's like a bunch of like assumed assumptions that we have all the time. Like I assume the world exists whilst I'm talking, and I assume I'm not a brain in a vat all the time. Like you wouldn't have to spend too much time proving that women are currently underrepresented in Parliament, because that isn't something that you have to spend too much time proving. But like this thing, teams would have to spend longer proving that quotas are the best way to improve female representation. Side note, I was going to say this at the start, but I actively encourage questions like, I do not care how silly questions are, I'd much rather you ask me and understood. So yeah. Okay. Yes?
With regards to like making assertions, as I said, women are like currently underrepresented in Parliament. I mean, it's like some things you can provide like a fact, and it's like you might know the fact. It's like sometimes people don't challenge it, and it's just kind of accepted by the judges. So is there any like good way of really like, I suppose realising as a speaker this is the judge like.
But it also applies for judges so that you know what to credit if you're judging something. So with the most obvious facts, so if someone was like, Barack Obama is currently President of the United States, obviously that's completely fine. If you want to give me like a statistic of women being underrepresented in Parliament, a good way your speaker could do that is first give me a bit of analysis why that happens. Be like, there's a lack of, women are actively discouraged from this implicitly, and then here is my fact. So it's not just like a fact floating by itself, it's got something to like upholster it. Yes?
This kind of relates to this as a question. How do you deal with judgment calls as a judge, being the advocate? So like with that, if a team asserts that women are currently underrepresented, another team counter asserts they aren't.
So I think if someone did that to me, I think the average reasonable voter would probably like sway towards the fact that women are underrepresented in Parliament. I think that's something you could get from reading like BBC headlines.
How did you get through that process? Like how would you have dealt with that as a abstract rather than just that situation?
So I'd go, how likely would an average reasonable voter who looks at the BBC website every now and again be likely to know this? And I would credit the one that seems most likely. If it was like two assertions and someone had given me a bunch of analysis for one and someone hadn't given me a bunch of analysis, I'd most likely go for the one with a bunch of analysis instead, even if it is false. So like you don't have any assumed knowledge whilst you're a judge. Like people have to tell you things and explain them to you. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Cool.
Is it kind of like acceptable if they do throw a fact out there and they don't offer any backing? If no other team in the debate ever questions that, are you meant to accept that, or are you meant to go, they've offered no analysis, therefore it goes to the side?
Yeah, I can see there being lots of different situations where that could happen, depending on how plausible the fact is. If it's something that's very, very plausible, then it's probably going to be okay. If it's something that's very counterintuitive, then it's probably not. Like I remember me and Eric were in a debate at work, and one of the speakers said, it was about pharmaceutical companies, and one of the speakers said that pharmaceutical companies spend the majority of their budgets on advertising, and just said it like that, and carried on. Like pharmaceutical companies actually do spend quite a large amount of their budget on advertising. But the judge didn't know that, and it's also quite counterintuitive. It doesn't sound very plausible to a judge. So they didn't credit that point, even though it was true, and that they needed to put more analysis. So that would be like an example of a fact that would need more explaining for it. Does that make it clearer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, in that case, the analysis that you provide is why it should be intuitive to believe that they would spend a load of their money
Completely.
on advertising.
Yeah, no, what springs to mind instantly for me would be talk about how there's a lot of competition perhaps between, I don't know much about pharmaceutical companies, but immediately I feel like it would probably be, there's loads of competition between pharmaceutical companies, there's one pharmaceutical company, you want to show yourself as better than another pharmaceutical company, so you have to spend lots of money on advertising to be able to get a good enough share of the market.
A useful fact for that, just completely tangential, is when you buy no-name brand ibuprofen, it's because the patent on ibuprofen is expired. So if someone wants you to buy something with ibuprofen in it, they either have to market it as much better than just their brand name, non-brand ibuprofen, or they have to substantially improve that ibuprofen. So a lot of like branded ibuprofen you'll see will come with caffeine and maybe some other things, and be advertised as cold medication, where it have a decongestant as well as ibuprofen as well as caffeine.
Yeah.
Because then the combination of those things can be patented, and that's why the marketing then kicks in, is because you say, oh, well, I'd rather have an aspirin rather than whatever where's aspirin? Anyway, I'd rather have an Advil or a Tylenol, like.
Yeah.
She explains it when I was looking through cold medication. And then these different brands, and they're all like slightly different combinations of like the same sort of drugs.
Yeah. So that's how you analyse your pharmaceuticals. It's not what this workshop is about, so we're going to move on from that, but thank you. Okay, so how do you be persuasive? There's lots and lots of different methods that people can use to prove burdens. I'm going to wait till I get quiet. There's lots of different ways that people can go about proving points. They can logically explain why an argument is true. This is like your ideal case, and probably it's not going to always happen. Like logically explaining something tends to just be something like, humans have legs, Mara's a human, therefore Mara has legs. Like it's very rarely you'll be afforded something that nice. You can present empirical evidence for an argument. As we've just talked about, don't be careful with just awarding facts out there. Make sure there's analysis back behind it. So be careful with that. Describe causally why a certain outcome is come about. So if we were talking about quotas and you're arguing against quotas, you could be like, this is why lots of people are going to feel annoyed if there are quotas for women in Parliament, and all these causal effects. This is going to lead them to do X, which is going to lead to Y, which will make them birth to women. Identify why you shared more intuitions in favour of an argument. You'll tend to get this in ethics debates. So if you remember do you remember the Birmingham motion about the cars, the self-driving cars? For those who don't know, the motion was basically if you're a programmer of a self-driving car, it was arguing that as a programmer of a self-driving car, you should program cars to not favour the driver in collisions, instead favour killing the least amount of people as possible. It's like hardcore utilitarianism sort of stuff. You use analysis like this when you're arguing against it, because in reality that's not how most people work. So you do it typically with thought experiments. So one that's used quite often is if there was a homeless person walking into a hospital who had no family or anything, and there were 5 people who all need organ transplants and all had the same blood as this homeless person. On a utilitarian calculus, it would be ethically the best thing to kill that person, harvest their organs and give them to people. However, we have this moral intuition that that's just wrong. So that's the sort of stuff that you get for that. Expose a damaging logical implication of a contrasting argument. I could see this coming up with things where we're analysing who is afforded more rights than other people. There's some people who will argue for animal rights on the grounds that animals often have just as much sentience as babies do. We care about babies, therefore we should care about we should care about animals. So if you were arguing against that person, they'd be they say we shouldn't care about animals. Is it about animal rights?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, that's fine. They say that we shouldn't care about animal rights, but they surely care about babies, so they should care about animal rights. Yes.
With regards to logical implications, how much should we credit the idea if they say, well, if you applied that logic retrospectively, then we would be at a worse outcome today? So a sort of retrospective argument. How much is that sort of?
So if we had done the thing in the past, then we'd be in a bad position right now.
So the finals of Birmingham IBs was on, we should give every piece of excess income to charity. If we argue, well, had we done that retrospectively, going on their logic, which would clearly still have applied in the past, that no, there'd be no reason why it wouldn't have done, then we wouldn't have developed globalisation, therefore we can ship nets off for contents or whatever.
I haven't been in a position in a debate yet where I've had to worry about that, which immediately makes me think that that's something that doesn't happen very often. I'm tempted to say initially just fear on the side of caution if people do that. Yes?
I think it's a form of squirreling, to be honest. Like, if you see a motion and then you go, right, we're going to do this motion, but we're going to set it 200 years in the past, like, it completely changes the motion, in my opinion.
No, but I mean, if they argue for it based on actual sort of, an actual grounds of logic.
Counterfactual kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you're saying, if this had been done up until this
A
point.
counterfactual-
If their logic's still on,
Order,
then
order,
use
order, sorry.
that saying, well, that logic would have still applied in the past.
It looks like this is not going to be resolved right now, so I encourage, like, we can talk about this in Joe's afterwards, so that is interesting. I'm going to carry on. So, those are things that are persuasive. Things that aren't persuasive. You want to make a judgmental cat decide if you do it. The number of arguments the speaker makes. Like, this comes a lot in schools and in novice debates. Like, when people first start debating, like, it's often hard to develop the skill of just homing in on certain arguments. They'll be like, this reason, and this reason, and this reason, and this reason. And, like, when you're judging that sometimes, you're like, they have so many reasons, but they only have two. What do I do with this? Like, if people do that, you usually just can't credit them, like, because it's usually not enough for them to just state reasons. They haven't analysed it, they haven't proved that their premises are true. Therefore, if their premises aren't true, their conclusion can't be true as well. So you can't do that, sadly. How clever and innovative the argument was, which makes me sad inside, because I love clever and innovative arguments. But they tend to not be the best ones. I assume by that they mean like novel things like that. Thank you. How interesting the argument was, which also makes me sad inside, but it's true. How loudly they spoke and how much you want them to like you. Okay.
Rosie,
Yes.
sorry. I'm always like, if there's a more innovative argument that still does like a good analysis of
Yeah.
proving why their side is more important, I'm generally more convinced by it because it's something like aside from it. So you're saying I shouldn't be, and I should be done.
So, like, I think that what that was saying was it shouldn't be by merit of its innovativeness that you credit it. So you don't go, it's so innovative, therefore I'm going to credit it. However, if you go, that's very persuasive, then you do credit it. So people can still say new and interesting things. It's just not by merit of them being new and interesting that you credit them.
Okay, thanks.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
Could you switch back for a second? I might have a question depending on which.
Yeah.
So, how important is rhetoric?
Rhetoric. Oh, so you mean like, surely this must be true, or like speaking using convincing ways? No, do not be rhetorical. Like, actively avoid rhetorical questions, and if people do it in debates, bring it up in feedback afterwards, because it's not persuasive. It's basically using word tricks. Okay, it's not persuasive in like an objectively good way, and it's not proving things. Oh, okay, sorry.
Like, how to phrase it, but it's kind of like, because sometimes, no, I know where it's the same time. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when we're sort of doing things off of intuitions and things like that, like you're like the homeless man in the hospital kind of thing. Can that, because often you're playing off of people's emotions, so can that sometimes at times get like borderline rhetorical? Because,
Well,
I mean, how do you...
I mean, there's a whole school of philosophical thought about that. The basic question is, there is no basic answer. And talk to Eleanor if you're thinking about thought experiments, because she wrote an essay about intuitions and whether or not we should trust them. Generally, in the world of BP debating, we trust basic moral intuitions, like people's right to integrity and stuff. So, like, if someone's proving to me with a thought experiment that people have a right to not be killed suddenly for no particular reason, then I will find it persuasive. I can't think of any sort of moral intuition things that could go wrong. Like, that wouldn't be particularly persuasive off the top of my head. But I'm happy to talk about that with you afterwards if you like.
I was just going to add, I would add one thing to the rhetoric thing, is know that rhetoric is the weakest form of argument in BP. As soon as someone points out that there's no argumentative basis for it, it falls. However, like you said, it is word tricks. So if you don't have enough time, or if there's an argument that you'd like to stand, but it isn't really important that it does, and you don't want to spend much time on it, rhetoric is a useful way to do that. Equally so, clarity and structure, while explicitly won't be judged, because just having good structure doesn't mean you have analysis, would sort of fall under the rhetoric style of idea. But structure and clarity, I think, sort of acts as a multiplier. So if you have a weak point, but it's really clear and structured, it might be equally strong to a stronger point that wasn't clear and wasn't structured, because they're missing parts of the analysis. So don't avoid being clear and structured, that is a very useful thing, but don't use rhetorical tricks unless you're doing it intentionally and you know that this will fall as soon as anyone points it.
They also differ in how you give feedback. So like standard structure, standard feedback, if anyone's not got structure, tell them to do structure. Like it just changes everything. But don't tell them to do rhetoric, tell them not to do rhetoric.
Okay, Rosie, one more thing. Can you pass the paper back to Alex?
Okay, structuring notes. Structuring notes is very, very important. I've got a picture of coloured pens because I love coloured pens. You know those big pens where there's like 4 different ones? Yeah, that pen exactly. That pen is a godsend in judging. But different pens, just do it. I believe in using different coloured pens for everything all the time. But not everyone is as stationary obsessed as me, so. Ooh, that's the wrong side. Okay, so this is how I tend to structure my notes. It works really well for me. You might have something else that works for you, but I'll just go through it. It's pretty obvious. I have a page for each person. It's not. I don't use other sides. I like to be able to see all the teams at the same time if I need to. First speaker, second speaker, and then when people come up to me for feedback, I just find the page that I need for that team, and then I have their feedback there. But if you want to use your own method or do whatever you want, make sure your notes allow you to clearly distinguish between different parts of people's speech. So you should be able to clearly see where their mecca is versus where their points are. You should be able to distinguish between people's points. You should be able to see where their rebuttal is clearly. That's why different pens are really useful because you can just use a different colour for each bit. Being able to see how people's cases clash with one another. So whilst I'm taking notes as a judge, I do numbers. So if there's a point that's reoccurring a lot, I'll number it 1 and I'll write it down again whilst it comes up so it's just there for me. And start to write down things that you think you'll say in feedback. So if you're noticing that someone's using a lot of rhetorical devices, it's probably not going to be your notes if you don't write it there. So be rhetoric, so you can tell them and be yeah, no, don't use rhetorical questions in your speech afterwards. Okay. Okay. So, as pretty much all of you know here, when you judge, you are in teams, so there'll be one chair judge who's the head judge, and there'll be a couple who are wings. When you're a wing, so you've made all your notes, and you're in the conversation afterwards with everyone else. Right at the start, the chair will ask you to give a call, so you'll be I think this person was first, this person second, this person third, this person fourth. If you differ dramatically, or they just want to be sure that they're getting the right things, they'll ask you to justify your call. Whilst you're deciding what your call is, make sure you have ideas why it's, you have a conception why your call is justified, and be flexible about your call. You're not, you're a good judge if you work together to get a good call in the end. Being a good judge doesn't mean getting the right call straight away all the time. It means about developing with the people and working together to create something. And these are just 2 general breaking and competition points. In most cases, try to avoid rolling a chair. By rolling a chair, I mean when it's been really unsure as to what a call is, and there's people are unsure whether this team should come first or this team should come first. They put it down to a vote. Most of the time, avoid voting so much that your chair gets voted out. Several reasons. Firstly, because chairs are usually a lot more experienced, so they understand these things very well. Secondly, which is a bit politically corrupt, but is true, if you want to break as a judge, you are less likely to break if you roll the chair, because they're going to feel bad about you and they're probably going to give you bad feedback as a result. But use your own moral compasses, do what you think is best in that case. Also, ask for wing feedback. That is really good for breaking, because it means that the judges think you're really cool and want to improve. It means they're you're at the back of their mind, so they're probably going to go back to the tab room and be oh, this person was really good and really wanted to get better, which gives you a higher chance of breaking. Yay! I keep on doing that. How to chair. This is basic structure of chairing. So ask a wing to set a 15-minute timer. Give people about 3 minutes to look over their notes. After 3 minutes, don't give people any longer. If people don't have calls, that doesn't matter. The most important part is getting to the discussion as quickly as possible. Take a call from everyone. Say that you're in a room where everyone has different calls and it's really, really horrible and you don't know what to do. Spend time finding out where you do agree and where you disagree. So you'd be imagine this is a chair call. Be oh, so me and person X both think that OG are better than OO. Person Y, why do you think? Okay. Oh yeah, no, these people both think that OO are better than OG. Person Y, why do you think OG are better than OO? See if they can explain it. If you're convinced, then switch. If you're not, carry on with this.
importantly, if you're a wing, stick to that justification. Don't start justifying why OO beat CO, for
Yeah.
example. Because the chair might not say explicitly why they want that comparison, but usually it's because they want to figure out a specific tension between all the
Yeah.
judges, and in this case, for example, they all agree that OO beat CO, so discussing them beating CO is irrelevant.
Yeah. If you have got a call like this, it's often the case that people have conceived the debate differently, and they think that the winner should be won upon a different metric. So perhaps like one person thinks that it's like on what side do we get the most like freedom of expression, the other person thinks on what side do we get the less hate crime. So you have to, if that happens, you have to talk about which one of those things are more important in the context of the debate. How have people proven that that metric of judging the debate is more important? And then try to reach a resolution from that. If you get to about 13 minutes and people are still disagreeing, take a vote. In a case where there is an even amount of votes and you're the chair, or whoever is the chair gets precedence, so the person like the side who the chair voted for would get that position. Because competitions need to run on time. Competition will prefer you running on time than spending forever going over and over a call. Then you fill in the ballot and decide upon speaker points. Speaker points take getting used to a degree. They can be quite subjective sometimes, but it's worth putting a lot of effort into them. I would highly recommend all of you like Googling the Berlin speaker scale and downloading it onto your phone so that you have it accessible at tournaments. So we don't tend to see speeches from there to the top 2 brackets. Like Sheng Wu Li did a speech that was a 92 once, but it just doesn't happen very often, so you're probably never going to encounter this. People are probably arguing for the wrong side of their here or haven't said anything. So 65 to 69, this is where a sort of like a novice who perhaps is quite nervous, they don't have very much structure yet, like they're not particularly clear, perhaps they're not speaking for the entirety of their time. That's where like they would probably place 70 to 74. So like the mid-range of NAMDA novice, no, the mid to top range of NAMDA novice 2014 was here. So this is someone who is arguing the right side, they have the right ideas, they might lack structure, but their analysis is really good, or they have really good structure, but their analysis like falls off sometimes, or like they're saying the right points, but they're not being particularly comparative with them. That's when people there tend to speak, tend to sit. The sort of the mid-range gap of Birmingham IB this year was in the 75 to 79 bracket. Now it tends to be people who are, excuse me, so they're probably quite well structured. They know what the point of clash is, but they don't always explain it particularly well. But I highly encourage you guys to read through this yourself as well and read through actual paragraphs. 80s to 84s, you're doing very well at this point. This tends to be like the top brackets of IVs. You're like comparative, you're structured, you're clear. 85 to 89, like I think Michael Dunn, who was the top speaker at Worlds this year, his top speech was 86. So you are very, very good debate if you're there. And yeah, you don't usually see the top areas. After this, you'll have to give feedback. If you're a chair, you're going to have to give feedback to everyone. You do this by first explaining the call, explaining why the call was like that way, like bring in things that you were discussing a lot, be like, we weren't sure about this thing. If it was really disputed, say it was really disputed. Like, we weren't sure whether you guys placed above, and actually these guys thought you came first, but in the end you decided you didn't come first for these reasons. And they give like some general feedback to each team. Personal feedback is a bit different. You start off with explaining any bits of the call that contributed to it that haven't been given so far, and then you think of that, like you go more in depth to them personally as a speaker. So here's some questions you can ask yourself about them. Could they have analysed their points a lot more thoroughly? Could they have structured better? Structure is such a good like feedback to fall onto if you've got nothing. Did they assume too much knowledge on your part? Like, did they say oligopoly and you don't know what an oligopoly is, and they need to say what an oligopoly is? Did they fill their role as best as they could? So were they a summary speaker who was focusing on the top half material instead of the bottom half material? They shouldn't have done that. Were there any sort of points that they didn't need? That's the sort of thing you can use in personal feedback. Yeah. So, it's now your turn to judge a debate. Do we have bits of, yes?
I'm just gonna say, because I always feel like I give kind of bad feedback, is when they like come up to me, like I had this like with UCL schools over the weekend, I sort of like struggled to immediately remember
Yeah.
what exactly they said, because it's been like an hour's worth of debate,
Yeah.
and it's like, I'm just sort of like, oh god, what the hell did you say? It's like then I feel like they're looking at me and I'm like pressured to give feedback. So
Yeah.
what do I do?
So a bit of it is just getting used to it. I felt the same thing when people first started asking me for feedback. If you're really, like, if you have nothing, go, did they have structure? Did they analyse things clearly? Did they do their role properly? Bring in stuff that was said in the discussion. So be like, when we were talking as judges, we said these things about you, so you need to sort of like behave in a way such that we don't talk about these things. Or like, the chair said this thing, and we think that's probably a good thing for you to hear. What other good things can I think of? Yeah, no, generally stuff like that. Yes.
So there's a couple of things in terms of like structuring it so you have things to talk about at the end.
Yeah, because I feel like I'm
Yeah.
just giving them like random points that I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like notice I've written down.
While they're talking, I'm always kind of critically analysing what they're saying to see if there's anything that could be taken down or anything that they're doing poorly, and I write it in a little box in my notes right next to it, just saying like, oh, they didn't analyse this point very well, this doesn't prove this very well, etc. And then, because it's there in a box, I can see that it's very separate from what actually happened in the debate, and it's very easy to just rattle that off at the end. If you're a wing, most of the time I just think of feedback for like people who are speaking while the chair is talking. So like there might be a point that you missed looking over your notes that, oh, this could have done some improvement, and I'd write that down, see if like they could improve on that. Yeah, so those are a couple of things I use.
Two things just for you to talk about, I guess, generally. One, as a chair, how do you give feedback? Like, how do you give the call, and when are you expected to give the call?
Okay.
And secondly, what do you do during your 15-minute prep time?
15 minutes prep time. What do you mean? Oh, the 15 minutes prep before the debate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what do you do?
Okay.
What shouldn't you do?
Cool. So giving the call as a chair, like if it's novice speakers or if it's school speakers, I find more often that they tend to switch off during feedback. So I tend to give them like general feedback first, so I've got their concentration, and then I'll give the call just so they're still on the ball. With university debaters, like you're all adults, like I will give the call first, just to like get that like off people's conscience, and then I will give feedback. The first thing I will do after giving the call is be like, okay, I will think about whether it's best to do it in order of first, second, third, fourth, or whether it's best to do it in OG, OO, CG, CO. But I will explain, like, comparing teams to one another, why certain people were going above each other. What to do 15 minutes before the debate?
I think explicitly what I meant was just don't think up points and expect to see them. That sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so Eric is right, don't like concede the debate before you go. Occasionally, like especially when I did Euros in my first year, I had big gaps in my knowledge, so I did sometimes find it useful as a speaker just to go like, what's China's foreign policy, or stuff like that, or like, what is this debate about, oh my goodness, because it means that you at least have like some conception of what on earth this debate is about. But I also agree with Eric, if it's something that you're quite comfortable on, don't be like, this is the points that will come up, and this is the winning points and stuff like that. Were you going to say something?
Because I do it completely the opposite way, but I think you have to be
Okay.
a bit more careful with this. Indeed, a lot of people just don't do it because of this, but I go the other way. I think it's very helpful to conceptualise what kind of arguments or what kind of clashes you expect to come up, and then while you're judging them, kind of frame in your head how they're all adhering to this kind of scaffold of how you expect the argument to go. So you have a rough idea of what they're trying to do at all times, and whether they're succeeding or whether they've left things that can be attacked or not is a lot clearer in my mind. But again, like you have to be very careful, because if you kind of think a bit too much into an argument or credit it too much because you roughly know what they want to do and you like that argument, it can lead to some bad judging calls.
Yeah. So be wary basically. Don't expect something to happen and be like, yeah, don't preempt stuff. Does anyone have any more questions? Because we're going to judge a debate if not. Alex, are you ready?
I am broadly ready.
Cool. Is there a whiteboard pen anywhere?
Rosie,
Yes.
A, sorry for being late. B, how is this being structured?
Okay. Oh.
Oh.
So what's going to happen is you're all going to get into little judging groups. Alex, have you assigned shares for each one?
I have assigned chairs for each one.
Brilliant. So then someone's going to be, you're all going to pretend that you're NIV, and for some reason this round is like super important and they need like 5 panels of judges. We're all going to watch a debate together. It's going to be, if you don't judge very often, it might be hard to stay switched on throughout it. Please try your best. Like, just try to concentrate really hard. Keep on writing down, just write down what they're saying if you see yourself floating out, because that's a really good exercise for you.
So you're saying none of the speeches are good to take naps in?
Well,
There's
no,
no speech to take
No,
a nap in?
no, sorry.